Tom Pelissero, kind enough to join us on loan from NFL Network. And where do you want to start? What team do you want to start with?
I feel like this has been TV right now is me trying to remember 27 different names in every hit and remember who's interviewing with who, what the schedule is on everything. It's a fun time of year, and this process is going to be longer than any we've seen just because of how they've kind of legislated it with some of the updates to the Rooney Rule and the way that they want these things now to flow. I think that one of the interesting ones is in Denver right now. Jim Harbaugh interviewed yesterday virtually for over 2 hours with the Broncos. The Broncos, their search committee, by the way, is really interesting because it's Greg Penner, who's now the basically the head of the Broncos, but also Condoleezza Rice is in on the interviews. Of course, some of the football people are in on it as well. But Harbaugh, after putting out that statement last week saying he expects to enthusiastically be coaching Michigan in 2023, continues to explore his options. He's one of the top candidates there. So is Sean Payton, who there's obviously the issue of working out compensation with the Saints. They can't interview Sean until I believe it's a week from today. And then, of course, they've also put out slips for guys like D'Amico Ryans and Raheem Morris, who are going to be, and Dan Quinn, who are going to be top candidates elsewhere. Somebody's got to come in with a plan, not just to fix Russell Wilson, but really a path forward for that organization. And since we're talking about Walmart money here, there will be no cost spared in procuring the right head coach. They're going to be very aggressive with this.
But I'm trying to understand what Harbaugh is doing. It was reported that he was seeking out a meeting with Carolina and David Tepper. Did he do the same to Denver, or did Denver reach out to Jim Harbaugh?
No, Jim Harbaugh was very much on the Broncos' radar. So he coached, before he was with the 49ers, he was at Stanford. Condoleezza Rice has deep ties to Stanford. Greg Penner got his MBA there. So they know a lot of the same people in the same circles. And so as they were coming in and evaluating what to do, really since the sale closed back in August, that was always a name that was going to be on their radar. So this is very much driven by the Broncos' new ownership group. They're the ones who are going to be making this decision. They obviously showed in firing Nathaniel Hackett with 2 games left in his first season that they are not afraid to move swiftly on these things. And so the plan was always to swing big. And that's where Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, unless everything falls through, I'd be surprised if one of those three does not end up ultimately being the Broncos head coach.
But if Harbaugh plans on being at Michigan, why doesn't he just say to Denver, thank you, but I don't have any interest?
There's one thing Jim Harbaugh has not done in his, illustrious NFL career, both, as a player who started a lot of games for different teams. And then as a coach, he took the 49ers to 3 NFC title games and 1 Super Bowl, lost to his brother in that Super Bowl. He's 59 years old. The Super Bowl is something that he's always chased. He likes the idea of it. I think he also can't overlook the dynamics at Michigan. He's now in, I believe it's his 8th year there. Back coming off the COVID season, they gave him a deep pay cut. He was, I don't know exactly where he stacked up, but he was not one of the higher paid coaches in Power 5. Got a raise after last year when he made a run. And then now, Michigan could step up and give him the type of lifetime sort of contract that keeps him in Ann Arbor forever. To this point, they've not finalized anything along that front. And I'm not saying that's what's driving him, is the financial aspect of this, but, he would like a commitment, and there is an allure to the NFL. I'm sure some people, I see them in my Twitter mentions, complaining that this is all leverage. And, the same people also are stressed out because what's he doing to his recruiting class and everything else. Jim Harbaugh is a unique individual. He's an unbelievably successful football coach. And so as long as Jim Harbaugh is willing to entertain the NFL will always entertain Jim Harbaugh.
How surprised were you what Arizona did yesterday?
Not surprised, because Michael Bidwill, the owner, had been moving like a guy who was going to run a coaching search. He had been doing homework on candidates. He had been talking to various people about how he would set up a search process. Because remember, his sounding board for the past decade or so has been Steve Keim, the general manager who took a leave of absence a month or so ago. And then now it was announced formally, which was always the expectation, that he will not return to the team. So that was his football liaison. Bidwill needs help to run this process. So he was seeking that out. That made pretty clear that Cliff Kingsbury's days in all likelihood were numbered here. Cliff will be just fine. He just signed that extension back in, I want to say it was around March, through 2027. So he'll make plenty of money to leave. And now Michael Bidwill has to hire a new GM. He wants to do that first and have that person lead the charge for the new head coach.
What about the Colts?
Don't count out Jeff Saturday. That is the one thing. For all the uncertainty about what direction this goes, and the full plan with the Colts is to cast a wide net. They're going to talk to a lot of people. They put out, I believe, 4 interview requests yesterday for, see if I can do this, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn from the Lions, Shane Steichen, and Jonathan Gannon. I think that's the right list. I might have messed one up. Anyway, they put out a few of them, but they're going to take their time. They're going to continue to do interviews here. But Jim Irsay is a big fan of Jeff Saturday. He believes in him, despite a 1-7 record as the interim coach, 7 consecutive losses. Wow. You've seen Jeff Saturday certainly deflecting the blame, for lack of a better term, and talking about how he would do things differently, and he believes in different things. We don't know what those things are because he has no track record to lean on. But basically, he said, hey, I can't fix everything at this time, so give me the opportunity. That would start with the offense. He'd need to hire a strong offensive coordinator. Jim Harbaugh is a big fan of his. He likes him a lot. He wants him to have a fair shake. So until told otherwise, consider Jeff Saturday a serious candidate in Indianapolis.
Do we have updates on Tua and Lamar this weekend?
Tua will know a lot more tomorrow if he's able to do anything on the field. If he's not, because he still has multiple steps left in the concussion protocol, then that would mean he's not going to be able to go this weekend. And his backup quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, remember, dislocated his pinky in week 17. He can throw the ball. I've been told that's why he was able to dress this past weekend as the backup quarterback. But obviously they didn't feel comfortable enough with him going out there. That's why they started Skylar Thompson. So it's not just Tua. It's also, can Teddy do enough through the course of this week? The Bills right now have to prepare for, I guess, 3 different quarterbacks. But again, if Tua doesn't get out there on the field tomorrow, there won't be enough time for him to progress. And quite frankly, just in talking to various people, I'd be surprised. It's not impossible, but I'd be surprised if we see Tua. And then in terms of Lamar Jackson, it's really in the same place that it's been for the past several weeks here. When he initially got hurt, the hope was he'd be back in probably 2 to 3 weeks from that PCL injury. It's now been 5 weeks going on 6. We've not seen him practice. He's missed 15 consecutive practices, 5 games. We've not heard from Lamar. Obviously you never want to, cast doubt on how injured anyone is. I would just say it's a surprise that he's been out as long as he has. And so, the answer is, while Lamar has told people that he believes he can play, and while there's optimism from the Ravens, they truly don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback this week. And then also there's questions about Snoop Huntley, because he couldn't play last week, and you ended up with a rookie undrafted player in Anthony Brown having to start a really important game that, by virtue of the Ravens losing, it means that this game this weekend is back in Cincinnati.
Tom Pelissero, NFL Network insider, got an update on Damar Hamlin. I know that he's back now in Buffalo, leaving the Cincinnati hospital.
He's back. He's at Buffalo General Hospital now, continuing his rehab. Unbelievable, Dan. If you go back a week ago, I don't think any of us, as we're watching, listen, I've covered the NFL for 20 years. That was probably the most terrifying thing I've seen in 20 years, just in the past decade or so. If you want to talk about the scariest looking injuries, it was Ryan Shazier breaking his neck. It was Tua suffering that concussion back in week 4. And then it was Damar Hamlin collapsing and going into cardiac arrest. All 3 of those events, by the way, happened in Cincinnati, which is strange. They all ended up in the same hospital. Just a bizarre coincidence there. But, the fact that you could go from that, and the NFL stops for nothing. It stopped last Monday night for Damar Hamlin. That shows you how significant this was. And so the fact that he's progressed to now he's walking around, he did a lap around the hospital, he's doing physical therapy, he's FaceTiming with his teammates, he was able to travel back to Buffalo. He's still got a lot of steps left. This is something that the doctors at the University of Cincinnati Health Center said it was going to be measured in weeks and months. It's not like, 3 days from now he'll be, doing normal things, but he has progressed better than anybody could have expected here. And I think that we're all thankful for that, just as fans of football and human beings who witnessed something really horrible that it certainly seems like is going to end up with the best possible outcome.
Sean McVeigh is sort of taking inventory of the TV world here. Is there an
Sean McVeigh he's taking stock of a lot of things. If you watched that press conference yesterday, Dan, he sounds to me, and I don't want to play amateur psychologist here, but just in listening to his words, he sounds like a guy who knows he's burned out, knows that he needs a break, and is struggling to cope with what that means for his life and if he's doing the right thing. Because once you walk out the door, even though the Rams would certainly hold that door open from him, you're in a different place in your life. I mean, I would compare it to, for me, if after 20 years of covering the league and doing news every day, suddenly I just went, you know what? I'm burned out. I feel burned out all the time. I just keep going because what else am I going to do with my life? If suddenly you just shut that down and you don't have that constant 24/7 perpetual thing that keeps you going, or leaving Sports Center. Like, I can't imagine that was an easy thing to do when something that so deeply defines you and that you put all your life's work into. And now you're saying, I don't know that I want to do it right now. It just seems like he's really grappling with that. He also said he's not done coaching. So, is that a Sean Payton, Bruce Arians style break here where he takes a year away and then he comes back? If so, do the Rams even run a coaching search, or do they name, let's say, Raheem Morris as the interim coach and then say, if you want to come back in 2024, you can? All those options I think are possibly on the table here, just because Sean's one of the most talented football coaches we've ever seen. But he's got a lot that he's got to figure out here. I know he said he doesn't want to drag it out. The coaches got the indication yesterday would probably be by the end of this week. We'll see whether or not he's willing to or ready to make a decision at that point. But this is not something we see very often here. 36 years old, at the top of his game less than a year ago, winning the Super Bowl, and now talking very openly and candidly about he might need a breather here.
Do the Bears have their quarterback, considering they have the number 1 overall pick?
It's a great question, and it's something that they have to evaluate. There's a lot of things that they like that they've seen out of Justin Fields. And to be fair to Justin Fields, it's not like he was throwing to a top receiver group this year. They did make the trade for Chase Claypool. He got hurt almost immediately, and it's really hard to integrate receivers midstream. And other than that, nothing against the other guys he's throwing to, but Darnell Mooney's a really good, solid player, but is he a true one who's going to carry that team? Equinemius St. Brown has fought his way for everything he can run, but is he a really true number 2? They've got to upgrade that. They got over $100 million in cap space. They're going to put weapons around him. There's enough to build with there, but it does bring them to an interesting crossroads here. It's kind of like what we were talking about last year when Howie Roseman made the trade with New Orleans and picked up an extra first-round pick in this year's draft. At the time, it was, well, if Jalen Hurts isn't the guy, then he's got 2 first-round picks. He potentially could move up. You could draft a quarterback high. Now, Jalen Hurts has put himself in the MVP conversation, and so it would be a big surprise if the Eagles do not ultimately commit to him as their long-term quarterback. But, the Bears have to sort that out. Do they feel like there's a generational talent, whether it's Bryce Young or Will Levis or somebody else? I'm sure they're going to go through all those evaluations. I've heard nothing to indicate that they're going to move on at this point from Justin Fields. And if they're not, that also puts Ryan Poles in a power position here, because this is not the 2022 draft where nobody was taking a quarterback number 1. Nobody was taking a quarterback in the top 10. You've got multiple quarterbacks in this draft who people potentially can convince themselves are worthy of the number 1 pick. And so Poles already has amassed draft picks from some of the trades they made. They've got all this cap space, and he may be able to turn that number 1 pick into a lot going into the future here as well.
Always great stuff, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
And that's Tom Pelissero, NFL Network insider.